What is up, everybody? Welcome into Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast. It is Monday. It is the playoffs. We're here, and I have a special guest, Paul Hembekides from ESPN, Hembo, who affectionately known by all of the folks over at ESPN, kind enough to join us to get into the numbers a little bit, set up this AFC playoff picture. Paul, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm not so sure that you introduced me, though, correctly, because there's not a lot of affection that that comes my way. But you most definitely nailed everything else. But all that to say, I'm thrilled to be here, and this promises to be about as exciting, about as open a playoffs as I can remember. The kind of thing that we say every year. This year, I think we actually mean it, because there are any number of teams in both conferences that you could see having a direct path to the Super Bowl, and of course, your favorite team, the Buffalo Bills, are no exception.
So, Paul is a New York Times best-selling author. Go get his book, Got Your Number, co-author with Mike Greenberg. Really cool concept. Can you take a second to explain that a little bit? Because I think for a sports fan, this is going to be a really cool read.
I appreciate that very much. So Greeny and I have written two books, the first of which is Got Your Number. It was a New York Times bestseller last year. And in a nutshell, what we did was write a 100-chapter book in which we attached a number to, in most cases, an athlete, but in some cases, a coach, in a few cases, a team, in one case, a horse, to say this person owns this number. So, for example, we wrote chapter 23 about Michael Jordan, and you can kind of figure out how we went from there. But generally speaking, it was attaching uniform numbers to the players that most represented them. And that was our first book. And it did so well, candidly, that they asked us to write two more. The second of which came out this past fall. It's called Got Your Answers. It's mostly like sort of a quick moving sports list book, mostly top 10s in which we tackle some of the most hotly debated topics in sports. And then later this year, we have number 3 coming out. So I'm staying busy over here, which is another way of saying I live in New Jersey. Daycare is really expensive. I have 3 kids. So I'm just going to keep writing books until my kids finally reach public school age at 5 years old.
That is super awesome. Yeah, you can get those on Amazon or wherever you buy your books. This is going to be a fun conversation because I saw you put out some numbers. I think it was about a little less than a month ago as Josh Allen was in kind of that tear that he went on late November, early December. And you have a Bills offense that has been historically good this season. And in so many different ways, the Bills PR staff put out a stat yesterday, first team in NFL history with 30 rushing touchdowns, 30 passing touchdowns in the same season. They've been so complete of an offense under Joe Brady, led by Josh Allen, when everybody thought the wheels were going to come off. I mean, can you kind of speak to what this Bills offense has accomplished this year and what kind of force they are facing against some of these defenses in the AFC playoffs?
Yeah, this offense is a wagon, and it is being driven by the best player in the NFL, Josh Allen. I don't say that as a Bills fan. I have rooted for the Philadelphia Eagles most of my life, but Josh Allen would have been my MVP pick last year. He, of course, got 1 out of 50 MVP votes because, in my judgment, most of those voters, or at least many of them, are lazy and ill-informed and subject to groupthink. He'd also be my MVP this year because he's been demonstrably the best player in the NFL. Now, that is not to say that Lamar Jackson or Jared Goff or Joe Burrow or Saquon Barkley have not had outstanding seasons, but Josh Allen has clearly and obviously produced the most value. And I don't want to hijack your question into making it an MVP discussion, but I think the two obviously tie in hand to hand. There is no player in the NFL who is a part of an elite unit that has more a hand in the unit's success than Josh Allen with the Bills. He is a top 5 runner in the NFL when you consider just the value that he creates in the running game, whether it be design quarterback runs, whether it be scrambles. And I think that most manifests, as you well know from watching every single snap, in the red zone. But Josh Allen also has had an unbelievable season passing in 2 different areas. Obviously, his arm strength and his improved or continuously improving accuracy continues to amaze me. But to me, the thing that has most impressed me about Josh Allen this year is the fact that he does not take almost any negative plays. Sack avoidance, in my opinion, is the most underrated attribute of quarterback skills. He's taken 1 over his last 6 games. It is an impossible stat. More than 200 dropbacks, 1 sack. And you're going to hear a lot of people tell you how good the Broncos pass rush is here over the next week. But Josh Allen doesn't care because he's better at avoiding sacks than any team is at creating them. And so all this to say, the offense is not that explosive, but they don't have any real explosive people. But it is very risk averse because Josh Allen is so shrewd with the football, something that he has improved over the course of time, and not susceptible to drive-ending sacks, which so many people are. So you sort of boil all the components of this offense into a pot. It's a delicious meal cooked by the best player in the NFL with an adequate supporting cast, but certainly he is the bus driver. He is in the passenger seat, and obviously doing so much of the legwork, given the fact that his skill set is so two-dimensional.
You bring up the MVP conversation, and it has kind of become this slog when you're on social media, kind of, piecing and parsing through all of these different conversations, because they do turn quite negative and quite gross, for lack of a better term.
No doubt.
When you look at the seasons of all of these players, and obviously you mentioned Lamar and Josh being at the top of MVP conversations. What else do you think has, especially with Lamar, it seems like he's had a really good run over the last 6 weeks to really cement the numbers that he's put up. But I think that there's also a counter argument that Josh Allen has had some of the most pinnacle moments of this season against the elite teams in the league. I mean, beating the Kansas City Chiefs and the Detroit Lions in the way that they did. If you had a vote today, explain it.
So Josh Allen would get my MVP vote for a few reasons. I am a numbers first guy. Numbers drive all of my commentary, and using that as our baseline, you might be surprised to hear that Josh gets my MVP vote because, well, candidly, Lamar Jackson's numbers, if you just look at the context-free numbers, Lamar Jackson has had a better season. But we don't live in a context-free world. We live in a world in which context is so important, and I'm addicted to it. Let's be honest about things. Josh Allen's support system this year was demonstrably worse than Lamar Jackson's, demonstrably worse even than Joe Burrow's. I understand that the Amari Cooper addition midseason was valuable, but by no means is this Amari Cooper the Amari Cooper that we have been used to seeing. James Cook is a fringe elite supporting cast member, you might say, but he's not a demonstrably greater player than Derrick Henry, certainly, and he most definitely does not have a weapon as good as Zay Flowers, nor, at least statistically, does he have an offensive line as good as Lamar Jackson's either in pass protection or in run blocking. So to me, the schedule that you play matters a lot, and the Ravens and Bills played comparable schedules, but your support system matters way more. You know better than anybody because you're close to this every single day. I'm doing the national shows, and so I'm hearing like the 30,000-foot view of most perspectives. This was supposed to be a rebuild year for Josh Allen and the Bills. This was a year that credible people were picking the Jets and the Dolphins to win the AFC East. This team had the division clinched sometime around Thanksgiving. Josh Allen played out of his mind and pulled away at the time and during the season where you need to. I'm not giving Lamar Jackson extra credit for taking longer for him to hit his stride. That is not to disparage what he's done over the last month. But Josh Allen played that well for a longer period of time before that, so he could capture the 2 seed. Meanwhile, the Ravens had to play in week 18 to capture the 3 seed in their own division. Granted, it's a more difficult division, but that to me is very important context too. A lot of the Lamar Jackson people will point to their head-to-head result, of course, and say that Lamar Jackson outplayed Josh Allen during that time. And my opinion of that is, of course, that happened, but of course, this is also a team sport. This is not golf. And the Bills reacted after that by trading for Amari Cooper. And then Josh Allen went on a bender unlike we've practically ever seen when it comes to two-way quarterback play over a span of more than a month. To me, it's actually a fairly straightforward debate. I think there are 2 right answers to this question. Those are Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. But if you asked me to pick one, of course, you get to put one name there for number one. It's Josh Allen for some of those reasons that I articulated, and perhaps many more that we won't have time to get into.
I do want to take some time to get into this AFC playoff picture because, Bills end up with the Broncos. Obviously, the Cincinnati Bengals made a late push, and that was kind of fun on social media the last couple of days as, they were kind of rooting for a couple other teams, but it ends up being the Broncos. You have the Ravens and the Steelers in a divisional matchup, and then the Chargers and the Texans. Where do you like maybe an upset? Because the Steelers are absolutely limping into the playoffs. I mean, a minus 61 score differential in their last 4 games, 4-game losing streak going into the season, but into the playoffs. They know the Ravens. They're a divisional opponent going on the road. Who do you think is the most live as an underdog of this group?
The Chargers are the Texans as a home dog are the most live against the Chargers, who are something like a field goal favorite. That might feel like a cop-out answer to you, but right now at ESPN Bet, the Ravens are a 9.5-point favorite. I think they're going to blowtorch the Steelers defense and make a point, run up the score, to be totally honest with you. And Buffalo's -9 against a Broncos team that has a good defense that it can hang its hat on, but can't move the ball nearly enough, in my judgment, minus a multi-turnover game from Josh Allen. to hang in there and cover that number. But the Texans have a top 5 pass rush. The Texans have a quarterback that can go nuclear over the course of 3 hours. And the Chargers have not demonstrated to me this year that they have the ability to go hang 30 on a good defense. So to me, even though that's a much less interesting game, the Texans in their staple of a Saturday 4:00 time slot to kick off the postseason, which is kind of what we've been accustomed to. But if you ask me in the AFC, there's only one upset that I could see. It's the Texans at home against the Chargers. There are going to be a lot of people who throughout the course of this week, and you're going to hear this all over the national media, I'm just warning you in advance, that are going to say the Broncos are live. Watch out for the Broncos. They had 63 sacks this season. Bo Nix is playing hot. Sean Payton, yada, 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 right? All things true, but their profile has not scaled when it comes to playing good teams this season, including their defense. Like, their defense has to, basically pitch a perfect game to go into Buffalo and win that game. They're not going to do it. And the reason I know they're not going to do it is because they've played good defense, good offenses all season, good quarterbacks all season, and their defense has not scaled up in most of those games.
The one of the key to the game, if you will, Bills Broncos this weekend, is you have a Bills defense that has been among the best in the NFL all season long at creating turnovers. And Sean McDermott has been elite at creating turnovers against rookie quarterbacks, especially the first time he faces them. In 13 career games, I think it's 17 interceptions rookie quarterbacks have thrown against Sean McDermott defenses. So how do you feel like Bo Nix, from a national perspective? I haven't paid a lot of attention to Bo Nix. I'm going to dive into him this week. How do you think he's prepared under Sean Payton to face this Bills defense, which hasn't been the best McDermott defense, but still very good at taking the ball away?
I'm skeptical. I'm really skeptical. We have seen Bo Nix's claim to fame, if you will, coming out of Oregon was his ability to avoid mistakes, those particularly being sacks and turnovers, which he did extraordinarily well in college. And by and large, he's done a really good job of this season, but he's also had some of these weird games where you see him make sort of uncharacteristic mistakes. And given the fact that he doesn't have the kind of high-level explosive play ability and traits, that's what would most concern me if I'm a Broncos fan. It's going to be incumbent, candidly, upon Javonte Williams in their run game, in my opinion, because they're going to have to possess the ball for 35 minutes if they want to have a chance to beat Buffalo, truly. Bo Nix is certainly not going to win a shootout against Josh Allen. Now, don't make any mistake about it. He's had a good year. Bo Nix has had a good year, and if you look at the numbers on balance, he's done a good job. He's played probably a year ahead of schedule just in terms of his mistake avoidance, and some of his big play stuff has surprised me a little given the fact that it's not elite weaponry. But to me, that's more a reflection upon a really good coaching job by Sean Payton, and if he has to go score 30 against Buffalo, he's not going to be able to do it. To me, what we can say for sure about the Broncos offense is that they have an outstanding line. They have the number one ranked line in the world of pass protection by a considerable margin. So the Bills pass rush is likely to have to use 5 or more resources on dropbacks in order to get to him. And the other thing that Bo Nix wants to do is get rid of the ball within 2.5 seconds. And so tackling is going to be of a special importance at the sticks for the Bills, I would say, will be the two things that matter most to me. Can the Bills create pressure with a 4-man rush? I'm skeptical given how good Denver's pass protection has been. And I also think it's incredibly important for the second level of Buffalo's defense to tackle, given the fact that they're just not going to subject Bo Nix to that many 3+ second dropbacks. So to me, from the perspective of when the Broncos have the ball, those are probably the two biggest keys.
Real quick break. We're brought to you by Tops Friendly Markets. Get ready for Sliders Sunday, Bills versus Broncos, your way with King's Hawaiian at Tops. Every Sunday, an opportunity to enjoy delicious sliders made your way, and now you can win big while doing it. Vote for your favorite slider weekly for a chance to win tickets to the big game, and grab your favorite King's Hawaiian products from Tops and craft the ultimate sliders to make your Sunday even more special. All right, big question here. From a national perspective, you look at this Bills team coached by Sean McDermott over the years. Obviously, 13 seconds is one of the first memory recalls when talking about the playoff disasters of Bills teams past under his watch. Is his late game management what might stop you from predicting a Buffalo Bills Super Bowl run? How concerned are you about that? And are there any other concerns with this roster, with this team, from what you've seen in a 13-4 season?
To answer your first question, no. Sean McDermott is not a good coach. He's a great one. And in my judgment, at least from a national perspective, most of the criticism, most of the slings and arrows that he absorbs are unwarranted. There are 25 teams in the NFL that would die to have a coach that wins 65% of his games, whose defenses, generally speaking, outperform expectations. He creates turnovers, as you put it, and he has done an outstanding job sort of molding Josh Allen into the best player in the NFL. you can, I suppose, argue that he doesn't get all the credit for that or even some of the credit for that. But the bottom line of it is he's the head coach, and we've gone through multiple iterations of coaching staffs, and Josh Allen has balled out of his mind. As it relates specifically to this postseason, I'll tell you the biggest reason why I might not pick the Bills to win the AFC, potentially the Super Bowl, and that's because I don't trust the defense against the best teams. I do this exercise every single year in which I just look at the statistics of all the playoff teams against all the playoff teams. And while you would expect Josh Allen and the Bills offense to have outstanding numbers in those games because, well, they have outstanding numbers against most everybody, it's the defense that has not scaled up to competition. So the Bills have played 5 games against the current playoff field, the 14 teams that made the playoffs this year. And by using EPA as my metric of choice, the Bills are the second worst defense of those 14 teams. They rank 13th out of 14th in defensive EPA. Only the Rams are worse in those games, which is to say, this Bills defense, if you look at their numbers in the aggregate, is a good unit. You articulated that very effectively earlier on. What I care about, though, is how your defense performs against the kind of teams that you're seeing in January and, lo and behold, potentially February. In that context, or using that as our backdrop, the Bills defense leaves a lot to be desired. And so what that means to me is that the burden on the offense is obviously so heavy. Is it capable of carrying it? Absolutely. They have the best player in the league. But if you have a B- game from Josh Allen and your defense plays a C game, you're probably not winning that game. I think they're going to steamroll Denver, but I happen to think Baltimore has a more complete profile. Now, granted, Baltimore has to go to Buffalo, which is a place that they have historically struggled, of course. And there was a game a few years back where Lamar Jackson played terribly. But this Ravens offense, this Ravens team is better than that one, is better than those teams. So that to me would be a grave concern of mine. When we get Baltimore 2 weeks from now, what is my defense going to look like? My personal opinion is that the winner of the Bills-Ravens game wins the AFC. I trust Buffalo to go in and beat Kansas City because they're better. I don't know that they're better than Baltimore, primarily because I don't know that they have the artillery on defense to keep the Ravens to, we'll call it, 25 or fewer points.
Everything you just said there hit, I think, all the right notes. There's this interesting thing kind of permeating in my mind, though, about this defense this year. Every single year, the Bills defense going into the playoffs has been this really solid top 5 unit in the regular season. And then they've had this epic collapse. The defensive line, every year they've been working. Brandon Beane has been adding different pieces and trying to find the right mix. And they get to the playoffs, they play against the Chiefs or they play against the Bengals a couple years ago, and their defensive line is just invisible. I'm wondering if maybe the very underwhelming regular season of Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, Von Miller to a lesser degree, although his pass rushing numbers provide some hope. Maybe they're poised to flip that script. And I also think you have a guy in Greg Rousseau who is the closest thing in his form in 2024, the closest thing the Bills have ever had to a defensive game record. But I think he might have to be that to beat the Ravens, to your point.
So it's a well-made point. And while I might not agree with it, I will say this. The Bills' style of defense this year, we'll call it high variance, sort of leaning into takeaway ability, that kind of thing, to me is actually a good way to live when Josh Allen is your quarterback. I will say this. You put a lot of stress on the kid then. What Josh Allen then has to do is play B+ or better football. Now, this is a guy with a 21-4 touchdown to interception ratio in the playoffs. It's literally the best mark in NFL history. I did this essay earlier in the year when I looked at his playoff results in their losses and was stunned by how well he had played in so many of them, right? The Cincinnati game obviously was a game in which he did not play well, and the Houston game, but that was a long, long time ago before he ever got Stephon Diggs. But they most definitely have not lost recent playoff games because of Josh Allen. But I do still think that in order for the Bills to win as many playoff games as is required to get to the Super Bowl against those teams, it's going to require 2 things. You're probably going to have to limit explosive plays somewhat and then live in the world in which you can average maybe 1.5 to 2 takeaways a game. So if you can take the ball away once or twice and then you can limit explosive plays, you can allow 6 yards per play otherwise. But of course, that's sort of a tightrope to walk. It also then requires Josh Allen to play somewhat mistake-free, which I do trust from the perspective of sacks. I'm not so sure that I trust that from the perspective of interceptions, because we have seen, at least at times historically, Josh Allen give the ball away too frequently. But at the same time, I don't see dominant defenses in the AFC this year that are going to capitalize on that 1 or 2 mistakes that he makes per game. So all this to say, I think the AFC title game is going to come down to what happens a couple weeks from now in Buffalo between the Ravens and the Bills. And I don't think the Bills defense is anywhere close to being the most important unit on the field in that game. To me, it comes down to Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson's play. And obviously, like I mentioned before, Lamar Jackson has a lot better support. I'm not that worried about the Bills' run defense, which a lot of people are worried about. To me, that's not really a thing. Like they lean into not being great in that area almost on purpose because they don't want to give up explosive plays. Unfortunately, Derrick Henry is the kind of guy that can pop one or two in any game and ruin that defensive game plan. So that's a long sort of roundabout way of saying I still think it all comes down to the Bills' offense, and ultimately the defense's responsibility is to take it away once and to try and create maybe two. Maybe like if you can, create 2 takeaways a game at most, maybe 1.5, 2 takeaways a game, and you can limit those explosive plays, particularly through the air. I think that's your ticket to ride. Great
stuff. Last question.
Yeah.
And I know that you said beforehand, you keeping it brief. We might only get 2 questions in over the course of a 20-minute podcast, but I want your thoughts on the Chiefs because it seems like you're lukewarm on them. And it feels like from the outside looking in, they're trending in the right direction, moving into the playoffs, at least offensively. What do the numbers show, and why might you be more down on them than in years past?
Well, the reason I'm more down on them than in years past is because they're just not as good as they were in years past. Does your record matter? Of course. It's the only thing that matters, at least up until this point. But your win-loss record is not a predictor of future success. There are other metrics that you will use, starting with scoring margin and then getting a lot more complicated and nerdy, at least people like me, in order to predict or project future performance. If it was as simple as, well, who won the most games, we would always know who the favorite is to win everything else. Now, their big advantage, of course, is they can play at home and they only have to play 2 games to get to the Super Bowl. But they're just not as good a team as Buffalo. They're not as good a team as Baltimore. That doesn't mean they won't beat them or couldn't beat them. Just to say, as someone who lives in the numbers, I would view them as having less than a 50% chance to beat either of those teams based on the underlying profile, the lack of explosivity in the passing game, right? The issues they've had along their offensive line, and the fact that their defense has regressed considerably throughout the season. The Chiefs are great and are always great. When you're talking about beating teams that are quarterbacked by first ballot Hall of Famers, I'm not going to do the whole someone has to beat them before I pick them to lose thing, because that's what lazy people in the national media do that don't want to actually do their jobs, right? I'm doing my job in telling you that I think based on the facts on the ground, the Bills and the Ravens are better than the Chiefs. That doesn't mean the Chiefs won't win. It's just to say that you're asking me to pick something. I'm going to pick the thing that I think is going to happen, and I think that means that the Bills and the Ravens, the winner of that game, wins the AFC.
Great stuff, man. This was as fun as I thought it was going to be. Thank you so much for your time. You can find him on social media at Paul Hembo. On X, are you Instagram? Tell everybody where they can find you.
You can find me at Paul Hembo. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I have not yet creeped into the world of Threads or Blue Sky or Green Grass or anywhere else where people might be creating profiles and spitting out content. You can find me there, and then you can find me every weekday between 8 and 10 on Get Up as I pop stats onto the screen and do the best I can to stump our analysts. But typically, at least as of late, they've been the ones getting the questions right. And so I have to go back to the drawing board in the new year.
Great stuff. Thank you so much. Go get his book. Take care. I'll see you later, everybody.